All right, everyone, we're going to get started. So thanks for joining us today. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the annual Health and Wellness Expo hosted by Campus Recreation. We are so thankful to our presenters and for you for joining us today. And we encourage you to attend as many sessions as you'd like. Please visit our website for the full session schedule, and I'll add the link to our website into our chat in just a few moments. Everyone here who attends a session is entered to win a t-shirt or a water bottle. You'll be emailed if you're a winner, and the more sessions you attend, the more chances you have to win. So just a couple things before we get started. This session is being recorded and you will be able to refer back to it on our website. And please keep yourself muted during the presentation unless directed otherwise by our presenter, Lindsay. And we encourage you to use the chat for questions or comments. Now I'd like to introduce you to Lindsay Johnson from Rowan's Wellness Center. Lindsay is a counselor with Rowan's Counseling and Psychological Services. She specializes in working with people with disorders of over-control, which includes problematic perfectionism, and often results in anxiety, emotional loneliness, and social difficulties. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and pass it over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Jason. All right, I have a little bit of a cough this morning, so hopefully we'll do okay. I have my water here. But welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm going to figure out how to share my screen too now. Okay. Can you see that, Jason? Okay, cool. Awesome. So welcome, everyone. I'm Lindsay. I thought that this might be a really helpful presentation. Talk a little bit about what we call flexible mind and finding this ability to be more flexible minded. I think oftentimes in life we are faced with circumstances that can make it difficult to be open, to be receptive, and we kind of go to one or two places, to this fixed mind or fatalistic mind. And I'll talk today a little bit about both of those. I would love for you to get a sense about what they look like, where they show up, and why they can be problematic in our life. Not only individually, but also, in how we relate to other people and in our relationships, because that's what's really important, right? Relationships are really important, and how we maintain that and how we learn and grow. So finding your flexible mind can be helpful to get to that space, a space of being open to growing and learning and developing better and healthier relationships too, with others and with yourself. So that's kind of the goal for today. And we'll talk about how you get to your flexible mind as well. So I think that Jason might be helping me with the chat, but I'm also terrible at the chat. So please, if you do have a question, don't hesitate to stop me and just interrupt me. I'm totally cool with that. I'd rather, have a discussion like thing here. So totally open to that as well as we go along. And this will be interactive a little bit. So I'm hoping that if you don't already, if you have a second to grab a piece of paper, you could use your phone too, because I'm going to ask you some questions and would love for you to do some self-reflection as well. So if you have that handy paper and pen or something to write with, that would be fantastic. All right, so let's dive in. So before we get started, just to know a little bit about these states of mind, that's what we're calling this flexible, fixed, or fatalistic mind. These are different states of mind, and fixed and fatalistic can be more problematic in general. And they often show up when there's a situation that's novel, meaning like there's something new about it or different, or uncertain, a situation that kind of has a sense of uncertainty to it. We're maybe not quite sure what to expect. Maybe something has kind of thrown us off that we weren't expecting. They can also show up when we feel challenged. Gosh, and I think about my life, how often I feel challenged. A lot of things. So feeling challenged, feeling criticized, right? If you just stop and think for a moment in the past week, we're imagining we've all felt criticized in some way. And so that's, a pretty normal occurrence and can often go into one of these states of mind during that. As well as when this is kind of a thing, but if we feel like we're the center of attention, sometimes for some people that may not be most comfortable space to be in. And so, or there might be some perceptions about why we are being called to the center of attention. And so that can throw us into one of these states of mind as well. That could be maybe a little bit more unhelpful. So I want you to think about that as we go along today, those instances that can put us into those states. And just generally, I'll say the problem that occurs with these states of mind is that they block new learning. They block kind of these experiences to be open, to gain new information. And like I said earlier, they impact interpersonal relationships. So before we get started, here's a question that I want to ask you. Because a closed mind, which fixed and fatalistic are kind of closed ways of thinking, a closed mind is almost always a threatened mind. So here's the question. What is it that I'm afraid I might learn or have to give up if I were to be more open-minded? What is it that I'm afraid I might learn or have to give up if I were to be open-minded? So here's the thing, I'm going to tell you a secret. I learned about these and I learned about being open-minded, and there are times in my life where I have a situation and I say, oh, Lindsay, this is a time where you probably want to be flexible. And I have this other voice that says, oh, I don't want to do it. I kind of feel like a little kid, like throwing a tantrum, like, no, like, I don't want to be open. And I think those instances are really important in my life because I stop and take a breath and I'm like, why? What am I so afraid of? Like, why is it that I don't want to be open in this situation? You know, what's going on? So there's probably something I'm defending against, you know, when those situations show up. So I usually ask myself, you know, what is it that I need to learn? What do I need to figure out about this, about not wanting to be open? And closed mind thinking can really become a habit for us, you know, because when we get into these states, and you'll see them in a second, you might notice, gosh, these might come up more often than we think, because it can kind of be a way of coping. Oftentimes, if we get unwanted feedback from the environment, we might pretend not to hear it. We might kind of avoid it in some way. We might compulsively try to just right away fix whatever the person told us to do without even really thinking about it. We just go into like this fix it mode, and that's going to get reinforced, right? If the solution works, then all of a sudden our brain knows, oh, great, if I go into fix it mode right away, things get fixed and work out. And so this is how I'm going to respond over and over again. Or if we get some some feedback we're not wanting, and we go into one of these fixed or fatalistic minds and say, for example, we ignore the feedback, we pretend we didn't hear it, we change the subject, and the person drops it, then look, it's gotten reinforced now. Like, oh, when I just pretend I didn't hear it, you know, nothing happens. So this is how these ways of thinking, fixed and fatalistic, can also become habitual. Okay. So let's learn a little bit about these. All right. So fixed mind. Let's talk first about that. We all have a fixed mind. So if you're sitting here thinking, I don't do that, are you fixed about having a fixed mind? You might want to ask yourself that. But fixed mind, I think about it like the captain of the Titanic, who, despite repeated warnings, right, about the iceberg that's coming up, is kind of like, full speed ahead. Those icebergs be damned. Here we go. We're just going, right? So pretty fixed about that, not taking in that feedback from other people. So fixed mind is really telling us that change is unnecessary because I already know the answer. I don't need to change because I know how it is. And we often can be in it more than we want to admit or really acknowledge. Most of us really want to deny even the fact that it exists, that we have a fixed mind. We're not even aware often when we're in it. And it's important for us to be mindful of the times that we're operating from this fixed mind, because again, it influences our choices. And why? It can really narrow our field of awareness, the information we're taking in, the way that we're responding to the world. And this is the part that I love in the fact that when I'm not being fixed, it helps you be more spontaneous to not be in fixed mind, right? If we're in fixed mind, it's really hard to kind of go with the flow and be spontaneous and just learn from our experiences and from the environment around us. And usually when we're in this mind, our reactions are based on rules or past experiences. So we may react kind of in this defensive way or aggressive way if there's criticism or some kind of challenge, or if someone asks us a question about something and we find ourselves quickly responding and kind of acting on these past beliefs. So I always notice that in fixed mind, if I'm really trying to explain myself, kind of go in this long explanation, or trying to justify something, or defend my behavior, or if I'm quickly trying to turn the tables on somebody else. If you've ever noticed this, or maybe had this experience where you kind of like will then ask a question to the other person. Well, if that's what you think, well, what about the time when this happened to you? Or what about this? You're kind of turning the tables. We're probably in fixed mind for then too. And you could see it really can damage relationships, because why? We're less likely to consider another person's point of view, right? Who likes to hang out with the know-it-all? I know I can't see everyone, but I'm more of imagining no one's holding up their hand, but right, we don't like to hang out with a know-it-all and somebody who's kind of always like, well, this is how it is and this is the answer, without that person not taking in new information and learning. Fixed mind can be associated with things like arrogance. It also might kind of come off as like this self-righteousness, excessive pride, some of those things that we tend to really not value in our friends. Right? We like our friends because they're, willing to be vulnerable, open. And, that's really important for people that we care about. And like I said, at the end, that fixed mind can really feel like this suit of armor, right? That protects, kind of keeps us safe, because being open to new information or being willing to consider the fact that we're wrong, it hurts. It's not comfortable. And so this fixed mind can be a way of us protecting ourselves from that. All right, so I have a question again to think about. So just think about this one. Imagine someone tells you that you are selfish. How might you respond to this? And would the response vary depending on the person who gave you the feedback? So just think about that a little bit if someone were to say that to us. How would we immediately respond? Because whether we like it or not, we're all a little selfish some of the time. And moreover, being selfish at least some of the time is actually healthy. That is, maybe not taking a phone call on a Saturday afternoon in order to take a well-deserved nap might actually be healthy. And an immediate rejection of feedback may actually block the opportunity to learn something about ourselves, or possibly correct the problem if there is one. And that's part of what could happen in fixed mind. So let's talk about finding fixed mind. So these are some cool questions. Here's the first one. What have caring others suggested in the past that you change, but you have resisted? If anybody feels like they want to put it in the chat, is like open to doing that, that's cool with me. If not, you can also do it on your own. But this is a good way to find our fixed mind. Because again, if we're resisting that feedback, that's probably our fixed mind showing up, and can be helpful to kind of look at maybe what are some things that people who care about us, right? Caring others who have told us that we have resisted, and thinking about that a little bit. Thanks, Kevin. I see that you put an answer in there too. Yeah, that planning, right? With things that aren't part of a routine or structured. Yeah, that can absolutely be challenging. And how do we take that feedback and learn from that? And right, not being maybe spontaneous or open, be more open-minded to things. Yeah. So fixed mind often has to do with parts of our personality, you could see, that we're maybe not proud of or that we wish not to acknowledge. So here's the exercise that I want to do with you all. So I want you to write down adjectives to describe yourself. So I'm just going to give you like 30 seconds to a minute for this. But for example, like thoughtful, determined, whatever it is, I just want you to write on the paper that you have a few different adjectives to describe yourself. So once you have a few down, even if it's just 5 or 6, I want you to place the opposite adjective right across from it. So the opposite descriptor next to your word on the list without thinking too much about it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just whatever is kind of the opposite of what you wrote. All right, so now I want you to look at your opposite word pair list. And I want you to just notice what comes up if you think about someone describing you as one of those words or more than one of those words. Is there one in particular or two in particular that are like really disliked, that you look at it and you're like, oh my God, I would feel like horrified if someone said this about me? Is there one that someone wants to put in the chat or share, or that came up when you think about that, an opposite word? Lazy. Thanks, Katie. Any other words that were like, oh, ooh, haphazard? I like that, Kevin. Selfish, yeah. Selfish. Oh, we have two selfish. All right. Yeah. So here's an example. Funny that we had some, oh, and another lazy. Selfish. If someone describes themselves as a caring person and the opposite for them was the word selfish, something terrible to be, how open do you think they would be to feedback suggesting that they are behaving in a selfish manner? Yet, as I said earlier, the truth is that we are all selfish at least some of the time. Plus, sometimes being selfish is part of healthy living. Like I said, needing to get rest or getting what's deserved or rewarding yourself for hard work. Plus, rigidly insisting that one must always be caring makes it less likely for this person to change their behavior and live accordingly to their values because they are unwilling to entertain a suggestion from someone that they're behaving in a way that's experienced as selfish. Yeah. Yeah. So they, right, can trigger maybe our thoughts, our perceptions, our perceptual bias about what that word even means, right? Like Kevin's saying, selfish maybe has these negative word connotations or perception about it, can trigger the feelings, right? And that make us then avoid the feedback altogether and just considering it in an open way, right? Rather than getting down on ourselves and either, and we'll talk about fatalistic, but in a fixed way, kind of saying, that's not me, right? That there's no way that's possible. Then we're avoiding the feedback. And that's really a fixed mind. And like I said earlier, it may actually close us off to pieces of information that are maybe true and actually helpful, or maybe true and something that we may need to look at or change. And that's how it can kind of get in the way of our relationships. Plus, we easily notice things in others. We easily notice in others those very things that we need to change within ourselves. So that's kind of interesting too when we think about it. The things that we tend to dislike in other people, that's that question I had, what characteristics do you find annoying, distasteful, or intolerable from other people? Because those things in others help alert us to the areas of our life where we're less open and may actually trigger us to be fixed if people tell us we may be acting in that way. So that's something to think about, what are the things that you really dislike in others, because that is probably a space where maybe is a blind spot for you that could show up in terms of your fixed mind. So here's another great question. This is just for self-reflection on your own, but in what area do you find it difficult to let go, at least temporarily, of your own perspective and consider another person's point of view? For example, there's a right, wrong way of doing things. No one really cares about another person. Compliments are phony. You might have, I don't know, but just this belief that you notice it's really hard to let go of, at least temporarily. And that's an important place too, to find your fixed mind. What might that tell you about yourself? And how might that help you learn about what types of parts of your life maybe are a little bit more rigid and a little more fixed, and can get us into trouble. Because have you ever noticed that the things that we're most rigid about are often the things that make us most angry? Oh my God, I remember learning about this and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so true. Like I get so frustrated about some things. And it's like, that's the stuff that's really that we're most rigid about. And, think about our hot buttons, and anger really can block awareness of things that we need to learn or change. So knowing what your hot buttons are really helpful. What are those things that someone can say to you that just makes you so mad? And you might ruminate about it or brood about it. Because I don't know, does anybody know the old saying? The truth hurts. Ah. So thinking about, what new information might your anger be preventing you from actually hearing? Those are some great questions and ways to find your fixed mind. All right, so how do you then, when you realize you're in fixed mind, we've talked about finding it and where it shows up and how. So how do you work on it then? Well, we work on being kind. I know it sounds funny, but the idea is to be kind to fixed mind. So the first step really in working through fixed mind and trying to respond differently is just to let go of trying to fix it. That it's really just being kind to it and being open to it. So you really want to just for signs for it. What are signs you might be in fixed mind? I always notice for me, it's when I'm super tense, annoyed. I mentioned being angry. If I feel myself wanting to defend myself or confront or attack somebody or thinking that the feedback is just wrong. So the first step is really just looking for signs of it when you feel challenged or surprised. And step 2 is just acknowledging the possibility that you might be there. That physical tension is that you probably feel threatened. And I think by acknowledging it that way, like, okay, this is probably something going on about me feeling some part of me is threatened here. I think that's a way of also kind of being kind to it. You don't just necessarily go into this fight or flight mode, but sort of just being open to that. Because kind of fixed mind is like this fighter in us. And even though it's wanting to protect us, it keeps us stuck. So just kind of being open to that. And then step 3 is really just trying to be kind to it rather than jumping right away to fixing it. So not fighting back your fighter, right? Don't fight your fixed mind. It's there for a reason. So kind of just opening it up and softening around it and allowing yourself some time to figure out, like, why is this showing up? What is this trying to protect me from? Kind of just being curious about it, I guess, rather coming from a harsh place about it. And asking yourself, what is it that I might need to learn from this experience? Fixed mind is super serious too, can kind of keep powerful grip. So it's nice to kind of like figure out, is there something I can laugh about this? Is there a way that I can lighten up about this? Especially if I notice that I have shortcomings, can I, be able to sort of laugh at some of my, maybe, foibles, I guess, these little quirks that I have, rather than getting down about it or serious about it. So there's some ways to start practicing that. Okay. Fixed. There it was. So let's talk about the other end, which is our fatalistic mind. So fatalistic mind, I love this picture because this is kind of what fatalistic mind is all about, right? It involves really just kind of giving up, abandoning. It's really the opposite of that fighter, right? It's kind of like, I'm not even going to challenge this. I am peacing out. I'm done with this. So it's really, I feel that picture, definitely all about giving up. So it sort of involves shutting down, abandoning a situation, really when we don't get what we want, or when we're just overwhelmed by this experiences. Like, this is all just too much, right? So if we go back to our Titanic example, it's kind of like the captain of the Titanic. After he hits the iceberg, he's like, I'm off. Like, he to the cabin, he locks the door. Nobody talk to me. La, 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 la. So that's kind of what he does. Rather than, refusing to help his passengers, right? He may be able to do something in terms of getting people on lifeboats, responding, but instead he just gives up completely. And so fatalistic mind can appear sort of submissive, and yet it's disguised as this resistance, indirectly expressed, really. So usually some of our action urges associated with this are to kind of pout, these passive aggressive responses. We might like stonewall somebody or get like, especially like I said, quiet. We might shut down, might be numbing out, just kind of resign to how or something's going on, get complacent, like whatever, like I'll just do whatever you say. And really it kind of involves also shutting down this goal-directed behavior. It could be problematic for us in our life because we don't end up moving towards a solution or kind of moving towards action, right? Especially when, again, we're faced with unwanted feedback. So oftentimes I think with fatalistic mind, people might have a sense of numbness. That's how I sometimes know that I'm a fatalistic mind, feeling that way. Okay. So let's talk about finding fatalistic mind. So fatalistic mind, when have you had thoughts that others must be right, that you are to blame, or that everything is your fault? Have you ever had the thought of like, oh, nothing I ever do is right? Like, oh, I can't do anything right. That's a good sign that you might be in fatalistic mind. Or often might you say to yourself, like, why am I even going to bother? Like, nothing's going to change. Nothing really matters. Those are also signs of fatalistic mind. Do you ever feel yourself like being a martyr? Like, oh my God, the world is just so unjust. Like nothing ever goes right. I'm such a victim of these unfair circumstances. Those are other good ways to notice you're there. Do you ever feel like people are out to get you? You ever feel like people are using you? These are the people who often kind of describe themselves as like just naturally cynical. I feel like they're often fatalistic mind. So here's another great question to ask yourself. How often do you shut down, numb out, or lose all of your energy? And when that happens, what do you do? For example, do you go to bed and sleep all day? Have you just having fantasies about how things should be or could be, or you want them to be, or just kind of wanting things to just magically change? Or do you pout or deliberately maybe give someone the silent treatment when things don't go your way? Oh, I am so guilty of this. Again, I become aware of that too in my personal life, right? When maybe someone disagrees with me, or again, there's some kind of unwanted feedback. And so I'll just kind of get pouty or give the silent treatment, or you get a little, what my mom used to say, fresh. That might start coming up too. Or do you ever disagree with someone and then when they come back at us, we just suddenly agree? Okay, fine. You know what? You're right. Actually, you're right. That might be another sign that we're in fatalistic mind. Okay. So write down, you might want to kind of write down some of those questions too, that the ones that we hear, that could be helpful in triggering your awareness of your fatalistic mind. Okay. Are there particular times where you think for you, if you want to write in the chat again, that you've been in fatalistic mind? Are there any particular moments that you can think about when you might be in fatalistic mind? I know the end of the semester can kind of trigger this too. Oh, group projects, that's a good one, Katie. I also am aware of the thought that group projects might feel like less control too sometimes, like if we have we can't control everybody, and so that might bring up fatalistic mind too, right? If we feel like we can't control something, it's like, oh, well then I'm just gonna throw this to the wind. Yeah, when you've tried to stand your multiple times, stand your ground on something. Yeah, retreating, absolutely. When things maybe don't go our way, we just peace out. Yeah, that's definitely part of fatalistic mind. Trying to defend ourselves with family. Yeah, these are great examples of times that we might be in fatalistic mind. Yeah. And let's talk about then, what do we do then? How do we challenge it? So when we are in fatalistic mind, This is kind of, if you think about fatalistic mind, that's the opposite of fixed, right? Fix is the fighter, so we have to be a little bit more kind to it. Come in with a little softer, gentler side. Whereas fatalistic is like later, so you kind of want to come in a little bit more challenging, right? The opposite with your fatalistic mind. So the first step is obviously looking for signs of it, kind of talked about. I think some of the examples may kind of lend themselves to this, but I know fatalistic mind can come up for me when I feel invalidated. People have talked about when they feel underappreciated. That's when they also see fatalistic mind. When they feel misunderstood. I think someone mentioned that, like defending against their family. I wonder if you were feeling misunderstood, because that's another time we can get fatalistic. When we feel helpless, maybe the group project piece is a little bit of that. Or like a victim. Often some of the other feelings and thoughts that come up with this is we feel resentful or bitter, or I mentioned cynical about change, like not wanting to do that, or feeling numb. So you really want to look for those signs in your life of when you might be in fatalistic mind. And again, same kind of with the fixed mind, acknowledge the possibility that we could be there, because both of these mind states really thrive on the hidden, I'm going to pretend I don't even know that I'm in this. So acknowledging the possibility of being there actually helps open us up to consider something different. Fatalistic mind is a really good escape artist. I noticed somebody said in there too, I think it was Lori, about like retreating, right? Like leaving. So fatalistic mind is our escape artist. Rather than openly resisting or fighting, actually, abandonment is the solution when we're in our fatalistic mind. And so it really thrives on denial and this self-deception that it's not really there. I don't really have that. And so it allows us to really avoid admitting avoidance at all, and then feel justified in what we're doing. So I think that it's important that we acknowledge that it's there in helping us kind of move to the steps of moving it. Yeah, it's definitely about avoidance. Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point, Kev, that the impact of mental health, the stress, the burnout, all of that is real. And I think that that's why it's so helpful to kind of consider, like being open to it, to consider what can I listen and learn from this? Because I think you're onto something right here, Kevin, but we'll get there. Here's the thing. Fatalistic mind, it usually is alerting us to something in our life that needs to change. Here's the big thing. Kevin, you were like right on point with this. Because fatalistic mind can sometimes signal that we're overworked or overwhelmed. I think that this was so essential for me when I learned it too, because I think a lot of my life that was showing up, and like when I notice fatalistic mind, it's really important, because I say to myself, this might mean that I need a break. I need to figure out what's going on and what can I let go of. And that change actually that might be most needed is rest when we're in fatalistic mind, or when that's showing up in our life. And that rest could look different for a lot of people, right? That rest could mean literal physical rest. That could be rest from a project that we're on. It could be, getting help with a responsibility that we have. It might be rest in terms of letting go, but in a different way. Rather than abandoning it, it might be a choice to kind of let our hard-held belief on something just soften a little in order to get rest. So we want to listen and learn from our fatalistic mind. What is it that I might need to learn? So you want to first take the step in acknowledging you may not want to change it. So admit that you're choosing to operate from fatalistic mind if you're choosing to stay there. Because no one can actually make you behave fatalistically. That might just be the choice that we're making. And then practice kind of like we had with fixed mind is, again, what is it that I might need to learn? And I love this. Take the power away from it by actually publicly revealing it. I think this shows up for me in my life with wanting to go quiet. When I think about the silent treatment with my partner, when I want to do that, I laugh because he knows that I work on this stuff. And so when it shows up, I'll say, I'm so aware that I want to just get silent treatment right now because I don't agree, or I'm feeling fatalistic and I just want to give up. And so I want to go quiet in order to give up. And actually, then I kind of start to laugh about it because it's so silly when you actually acknowledge that you're trying to be silent, it kind of makes it ridiculous, right? So that thrive in secrecy can really help you then when you open up publicly. You let me know about it. So you want to just practice in a non-judgmental way, opening up, outing yourself about that to somebody. If you find yourself intentionally doing any of that stuff, like I mentioned, pouting or stonewalling or just kind of pretending to comply, even if you don't agree. So you kind of let that person know it's really going against your values and you want to do something different. The other part of this step is actually trying to work to stop blaming others for making us miserable, because this shows up with fatalistic mind a lot. That kind of goes with that cynical piece. So we want to go all the way opposite to that by admitting to ourselves and to other people how we may have contributed to the problem. That might even be my acknowledgement of that I've taken on too much. Like I have maybe said yes to too many things, and that was my fault for not being able to say no, if I'm feeling overworked. So it's really about trying to do that and then actively taking those steps to fix it. Because whereas fixed mind, we're already trying to fix. Fatalistic, we're giving up. And so actually trying to find a solution is really helpful, and to kind of clarify what are the things that I might need to do actively to change this in order to have a different outcome, rather than just kind of hoping things will change magically overnight. Because sometimes that happens with fatalistic mind too. We kind of get into this dream world that things are going to change. And just remember that fatalistic mind doesn't mean necessarily that you're doing anything wrong. Like I mentioned earlier, that you may actually be working too hard. You need to give yourself a rest. Or this is really important too, you may need to grieve a loss of something. I think that can also be part of what shows up with fatalistic mind. We maybe are not fully coming to grips with a loss that we've experienced. And loss just doesn't have to mean death. Loss could be a loss of expectation, a loss of belief about something. I'm extrapolating because someone gave the good example of defending against family, but right, your family may feel completely differently about you on a subject. I think this came up a lot, with even around some political stuff this year, when you think about maybe families feel differently about things, and you may feel so fatalistic about that. It really may be about needing to grieve the loss of who you thought these people were, or like what you wanted maybe life to look like or things to look like, and really being kind to that part of yourself. And then that maybe turning your mind to the possibility of change if that's what's needed, because again, it may be that need to make a difference or make a different choice. Okay.
Lindsay, we got a question here in the chat that I want to make sure we don't skip
Oh yeah.
over.
Thanks, Jason.
From Erica. Erica asks, does gaslighting myself count as a fatalistic mind because I do it all the time?
Interesting question. I mean, I would say if that doing that behavior then gets you, Erica, to feeling like you want to give up, you're feeling numb, you're feeling like kind of those pieces that we have here about wanting to just abandon, if those are kind of your responses to the gaslighting yourself, then I would say, yeah, that sounds like it could definitely be a fatalistic mind state. Absolutely. Really interesting. Okay. All right, so let's talk about flexible mind then, if we're ready to move. Because I'm looking at time too and wanting to make sure we get there, right? So flexible mind. Why in the world would we want to be flexible? Well, flexible mind, let's talk about this. It's actually a synthesis between these two mind states of fixed and fatalistic. So it really involves this really purposeful self-inquiry, like again, those questions of asking ourselves, what is it that I might need to learn? What might it mean? It's like that active curiosity that's just being open to exploration, to self-discovery. And it's really the essence of being open. And that's kind of what we're working to get to, right? In the end, we may choose to still be fixed or fatalistic about something, but the flexible piece is being able to consider another option and just being open to that. And that's what's really important. And so it's kind of like, if we go back to our Titanic example, it's like the captain of the Titanic who doesn't necessarily, doesn't abandon ship and doesn't completely turn around at the first sign of an iceberg, right? But is willing to change course. She might be willing to look at her maps, consider another option, reduce her speed when the icebergs do come up, right? Kind of really trying to continually work at that situation. And even if she hits the icebergs in the end, respond in a way that maybe is more aligned with her values, that could be helping people, responding in a different way. So it really involves, flexible mind is about being willing to open to listen openly to criticism, to feedback, to things that are maybe disconfirming without immediately denying them or abandoning from them, or maybe just agreeing with them quickly, right? Because we might do that too. And so that may not even be helpful. So it's really just kind of willing to experience things with this openness. And it's not really about being balanced, which I kind of laugh about because sometimes we think about that, right? That everything needs to be a balance, meaning that you don't always have to be calm or stable or kind of in the middle. That sometimes life calls for us to be a little wild and spontaneous. Sometimes we might need to yell at somebody and do something in a way that's aggressive, right? To maybe stop something that we see happening that's not okay, out in the street. Or we may need to, in a situation, dance with a little, disinhibition, right? Just kind of go at something. And so it's really about kind of finding, it values kind of both of those things. It values disinhibition while also it values inhibition too, flexible mind. So kind of finding that space. So remember too that other states of mind block learning, like we talked about earlier. And so fixed fatalistic mind really stop us from learning things like new information and learning from those, like the disconfirming feedback might this be telling us. Flexible mind is really this more open, receptive, flexible way of responding. And it really helps us build resiliency. We talk a lot about that, right? Being able to kind of manage in the face of really challenging things in life. It's really doing what's needed in the moment, kind of deciding like, we might need a different response to this. So it's flexible mind is about turning our mind to the possibility of change and changing if that's what's needed. So you kind of saw that in both parts of how we respond to fixed and fatalistic mind. If you noticed, we did talk about that, like turning towards some type of change. That change with fixed is being more open and kind of being more kind to that. With fatalistic mind, it's maybe, changing something in our life that's not working for us, or changing how we respond, grieving the loss of something. That's important as well. And again, fixed mind, sorry, flexible mind. Look at me, I'm on a train now. Flexible mind is the part about what's needed in the moment. A good example for that is, I don't know if anybody here is somebody who's maybe often striving for perfection. I know I can often identify with that. And so it might mean that we need to stop when we have feedback in our life that's suggesting that striving is actually counterproductive for us, or it's damaging a relationship. That's kind of what that means. It might mean too that perhaps we're rule governed a lot of the time, but flexible mind means that sometimes we may need to break the rules when that's required. Perhaps when it's going to help us live more closely aligned with our values, when that's necessary in a situation. Flexible mind acknowledges too that we don't see the world as it is, but we often see the world as we are. So flexible mind acknowledges that we have our own perceptual biases, right? We kind of go into situations already with a way of viewing the world because our brains are different, our life experiences are different from everyone that we're going to meet. And so flexible mind acknowledges that and knows that there's no maybe one way to respond to a situation, that we need to be open and considering that we have blind spots, that we might not see everything, as it is, and being open and willing to see that and challenge that as well. What about flexible mind as well? It acknowledges, I don't have it on here, but it acknowledges, it takes responsibility for our own personal reactions to the world, kind of similarly to what we talked about earlier, rather than just kind of blaming or expecting things to change. It really takes responsibility without harsh self-blame. So I think Erica was the one that mentioned gaslighting, but acknowledging too, like, do I often have this harsh self-blame to myself when I recognize an area of growth for me? Because flexible mind isn't about that. We recognize that we might need something to change, but we're still kind to ourselves and compassionate rather than really getting down on ourselves. Because then we're moving back into fatalistic probably. If we're like, oh, I'm the worst ever, like, why can't I get this right? That's kind of moving again to that place of being a victim. Flexible mind too acknowledges that we choose our emotional responses. We recognize that people can't force us to feel a particular way, like to feel anger or to feel sadness necessarily, although it says and it knows that there are things that are outside of our control that can trigger emotions. You know, people have traumatic experiences that are out of their control. And so flexible mind realizes that, recognize that how we respond to life events almost always involves some choice on our part. We might have an initial response, but then how we continue to choose how to respond is our choice. It celebrates diversity. Flexible mind really, like I said earlier, realizes that there are many different ways to live and behave, and that's what makes the world beautiful, and kind of being open and flexible to that with ourselves, with other people. And it really, I think I have this somewhere. Maybe oh, Lindsay, you had a whole nother slide on this. That's okay. This is just kind of what I've been saying. But flexible mind also values, I think this is kind of cool, it values negative emotions and judgmental thoughts, because it says that those are opportunities for growth. A flexible way of viewing the world and flexible way of thinking says, like, when I have those negative emotions, when I have those judgmental thoughts, this is a good time to ask myself, like, what is this all about? You know, it's an opportunity for me to grow and learn and really be curious about myself and possibly learn something I haven't learned before. And again, commit to changing something, possibly if change is what's needed. Might be it. So it's a little bit all about those mind states. Hopefully that was helpful. I mean, I think and kind of the goal then moving forward is just noticing in your life when these things show up, when you might be feeling that tension, those urges to either kind of fight back, to just kind of let go, abandon, and just start kind of, like we talked about today, asking yourself some of these questions, considering, you know, how might I move to maybe this more flexible way of responding that's going to not only help myself, but also the people in my life that I interact with. I want to just leave, you know, the 2 or 3 minutes for any questions and see if anybody had anything else. Yeah, Kevin says we can work through challenges, new environments, navigate situations. Absolutely, with transitions. Yeah, a lot of with life, and I think life transitions can probably move us to those 2 states of mind, because again, they might be trying to protect us when things are uncomfortable. Like, I think when situations are uncomfortable, we might move into either being fixed or fatalistic. So yeah, and it's really helpful to practice coming from more flexible state of mind.
If anybody has any more questions, we can throw some in the chat, or feel free to come off mute for the next few minutes.
So Lindsay, can I ask a question or kind of throw something out there that so this helped me realize, like, when you were talking, you know, I've often thought of fixed mind or fatalistic minds as 2 separate mindsets. And today when you were talking, it actually, I was thinking about a situation that happened yesterday, probably weekly for me. But I was thinking, you know, I'm in a fixed mind. Yes, this is a description of fixed mind. And then I was like, wait a minute, there's some overlap, I think, sometimes. And so instead of like these 2 concentric, you know, circle, like, I feel like there's like some overlap that sometimes if I'm too much in a fixed mind, that then that will kind of lead me, if I can't identify the fixed mind and sort of work on it, that then I sometimes get led into, lead myself into a fatalistic mind. And then I'm like, that's when I'm like, okay, this isn't me, I'm out. And so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that, see what what you have to say about that. And I mean, maybe it works the other way too. Maybe somebody has an idea about that. But, you know, where I kind of sometimes get stuck is probably that defense mechanism where I'm like, wait a minute, if I give this up, right, this defensiveness, like, right, like I think one of your first questions was, what would I have to give up? And then my thing is like, well, it feels like you're giving up part of you, or it might feel like you're giving up a value or something. And because it's comfortable, you talked about like these things are things that we've learned. And when we have a reaction, it's comfortable to us to have that reaction and do whatever, because then it helps us to feel justified or whatever. Right. So I kind of like, one of the questions that I kind of grapple with a little bit is like, is there a line, and is this less about providing a definitive answer and more about the discovery? Like nobody wants to feel like they're giving up a deeply rooted, and then I sound like an 80-year-old, whoops, sorry, but like, I sound like whatever that grumpy old man thing, right? Like I sound like a grumpy old man, like I don't want to give up who I am. I'm right.
Yeah. Well, you have a lot of good points, Lori. It's nice to see you too. Yeah, so, well, your first point I wanted to mention was I'm glad you brought up the kind of how they react together, because I did want to mention that you do often see that where someone will be strongly one, which will then, if they're not getting what they want from that state, they'll go into the other one. And I think people probably tend to start with one, like you might say, like, I'm more of a fixed person or I'm more of a fatalistic. People tend to have one that they are more comfortable with, but will for surely go to the other one when the first one isn't working. And I think of it kind of like fight or flight, vice versa, right? Because like you might be kind of fighting for something you want so badly, and then when you're not getting it, you're just like, I can't, and then you give up. Or vice versa, you might be trying to move away from something, and if that keeps kind of coming towards you, then you're gonna like fight back. So yeah, people have said that it comes from both sides. Absolutely. So yeah, I would say that they kind of play off of one another. Yeah, and your other point's a good one. I think it's true that it is hard to give this stuff up. That's why I asked that first question about like, what is it that we're afraid of losing? Because I think that that's probably what really keeps us in these spaces. Like, it's comfort, right? Like, it's that other stuff is scary, the unknown, right? I think for as humans too, like the unknown is really uncomfortable. So it's like, even if I know what this is, even if it's not working for me, versus like, what is this other thing going to do? I'm not quite sure if I give up, what maybe I've responded to in the past. Or I think the idea is like, not to necessarily be having to give up our values. And maybe we need to kind of check in on that. Like, I think that's that part about the flexible piece is kind of like deciding, does this or does this not align with my values? And maybe I decide that it does, but if it's causing us some grief in some way, it might be actually, maybe it isn't aligned with our values. And maybe that's even scarier, because then it's like, oh my God, what does that mean? Is there a different value that I actually possibly have that I didn't realize? And that's kind of wild to think about. So yeah, and I think probably the later we get in life, the harder that gets, because it becomes so habitual. It becomes even scarier to try something different and to change. But not that it's not doable. I think there's still ways of exploring that. But yeah, I hope I hit everything. I don't know if there's anything else, but yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. That was really helpful, Lori, to talk about that from your experience too. Yeah.
We've got one more question in the chat too.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So you mentioned about grieving over something that this individual did not receive as a kid, or not having things turn out the way they wanted. So how could they heal from a grief like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that can take a little bit of time. I think it involves I'm a therapist, so I'm going to say it would probably be good to go to someone who's going to help you through that process. I think you can probably do it on your own too. And yeah, I think it would probably be helpful to connect with someone. And we have great resources at Counseling and Psychological Services at the Wellness Center. And I think there's probably this work to kind of be done about exploring, like, what really are those things that weren't met, those expectations? What are the things that I lost? What are the hurts and the grievances that I actually have? And what I usually work with people about is like starting with smaller ones. If someone were to kind of make a list of some of the grievances or the losses or the hurts they've had from someone or in their life, I don't usually start with the healing of the hardest one. It's kind of like maybe start with one of the smaller ones first and do some practice around what are the kind of the questions we asked today. What are the things that are still keeping me stuck holding on to this? What am I afraid will happen if I let go of this grief? Because sometimes we aren't grieving because we're holding on to a part of it for a fear of something that could happen if we let go. So, is there something I'm afraid that might happen? Asking some of those questions of ourselves. And then actually just kind of committing to this work of maybe over and over again, kind of saying to ourselves, like, I want to work on letting go of this expectation that my parents were going to be X, Y, and Z, and noticing what comes up with that and just being able to sit and process that. But I think that healing piece could be really helpful done with someone else and connecting with somebody else on that.
Thanks, Lindsay.
You're welcome.
That was a fantastic presentation, some very valuable information. And so before we wrap up this session, please check out our additional sessions today and tomorrow. And we're offering in-person activities today on the intramural field from 2 to 4 p.m. And you can visit the Row and Thrive website or PropLink to learn more about various dimensions of well-being and all the program services available to Rowan students, faculty, and staff. And I put the link in for our Expo's website so you can view the rest of the schedule and read session descriptions and register for whichever sessions you would like. So thank you again, Lindsay, and thank you everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. So good to see people. Thank you.